We are on.
Wonderful. Welcome to Thursday's edition of our Be Strong Families daily webinar. We are having part 2 of our Dreams in Grief and Grieving with Alejandro Salinas. His pronouns are he, him, and I'm going to read his bio because he's very accomplished, and we're really happy that he's with us again for part 2 to continue the discussion and the learning that we started on Tuesday. Just want to pause here. Is my audio okay? Thumbs up or confirmation from our panelists. Awesome, thank you. Okay, Alejandro Salinas is a yoga teacher, dream worker, massage therapist, musician, and grief advocate. In 2020, he released Drifting, his debut ambient album for sleep and meditation as Ale. He co-hosted on the Dream Freaks podcast and teaches weekly dream yoga classes and hosts monthly death cafes and dream circles through Inner Sense Healing Arts Collective. You can find him on Instagram at Ale, ALEJ _ Salinas, and I'll post this in the chat. He is a yoga teacher, dream worker. Okay. And he was with us on Tuesday, speaking with us about the role of dreams and sleep hygiene. And today he's going to do part 2 and take us a little deeper into practices and frameworks for understanding the role of dreams in our lives and how we connect with dreams. So before we get there, we're having folks just check in. If you can post in the chat your name and where in the world you're joining us from. And then we can go to the next slide, Lori. We have Ana Rodriguez from Wichita, Kansas. Okay, this is ways to engage. If you've been with us before, you know that we ask you to keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking. If you raise your hand, we will be taking some moments to pause and turn on the audio so that you can ask questions or share your thoughts. We have Eddie Begonia from Tupelo, Missouri. We also will be reading your comments in the chat as they come up. And we just ask that you be patient as we work with the technology that we have that allows us to be connected. Okay, maybe we can go to the next slide. These are the agreements. We want to make sure this is a safe place for us to be learning and connecting together. So speaking from your own experience, following the golden rule, bringing as much of your full presence as you can today. And because we are talking about grief and grieving and other things that may touch an emotional part of you, if you need a minute, take a minute. And if you agree to follow the commitments for yourself and others in the space, type agree in chat. That would be wonderful. And then let's go to the next slide. I see we have our super fans, our folks who attend with us quite often, greeting each other by name. We're happy to have those of you who might be new, those of you who've been with us for multiple webinars. I think this slide we might wait to cover at the end, and we'll turn it over to Alejandro to reconnect us in the dream conversation and share the slides that he wants us to be looking at today.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me again. I had so much fun last time. I hope you all had a lot of fun. We're going to pick up where we left off and yeah, dive a little bit deeper, talk a little bit more about dreaming and death and dying well and preparing for that, which is an integral part of the dream practice. So, we ended last time talking about some of these methods of induction. We talked about the mild, mnemonic induction, reminding yourself to remember to dream, and falling asleep consciously. And I want to talk a little bit more about this dream planning. And normally I would have you all spend a couple of minutes doing this exercise but I just want to talk about it for the sake of time today. And dream planning or dream incubation is a great way to induce a dream, to kind of paint the subconscious mind, to kind of prime it for whatever kind of dream you would like to have. And you can really use this for any kind of dream work you're wanting to do. So one is to set down your intention, right? An intention in Yoga Nidra we call a sankalpa, is usually a positive present tense affirmation. I like to say something you want to invite, something you're trying to cultivate or nurture in your life. And then you want to write down a brief synopsis of the dream, which is, a summary of how you imagine that dream to be going. And then to draw a picture. And the picture doesn't need to be fancy. When I do dream planning, I use stick figures. You don't need to be an artist, but drawing pictures bypasses some of our more linguistic, logical forms of thought. And we're translating that into image. And imagery, which we've already talked so much about, right? The imagination is such a powerful force for the dream work. And something I didn't put in the slide, but that I also recommend you try out, is to just write a letter to your subconscious mind. And we did this in class, in my dream yoga class, 2 Wednesday nights ago, I believe. And, in it I wrote that I wanted to see my dad. And sure enough, like that same night, I had a dream where I ran into my dad at the restaurant he worked at. And we had a really nice chat, and it was just so nice to just be immediately rewarded in that way, just by writing the letter to my subconscious mind. We're really developing a relationship and treating our dreaming selves as almost as if it really were an entirely different person with their own cognition. So, the wild method can be a little more intense, and only intense in that we might experience a few more things. One of those things is sleep paralysis. I'm sure a few of you maybe deal with sleep paralysis regularly. Some of you maybe have never had sleep paralysis. It really varies on people. But sleep paralysis has a lot of myths, and a lot of cultures talk about sleep paralysis in a lot of different ways of, like incubi, succubi, or demons, in your room, and all kinds of things. But what's happening in sleep paralysis on a scientific, more anatomical level is that it is a liminal space. So you are on that edge of waking and dreaming. And while we're dreaming, our bodies get paralyzed so that we don't act out on our dreams. And this is a condition some people do have, unrelated to sleepwalking, but some people do tend to move more and act out their dreams. So in the sleep paralysis, body's inhibited. Well, that means it's harder to breathe. So it often feels like our chest is collapsed, and you can still breathe, but when you mix that with the rich dream imagery that we have, it sometimes feels like an entity can be sitting on your chest. And it's not always like demons or something. I've had sleep paralysis where I feel like someone's trying to break into my apartment, and I'll hear like footsteps or like the door opening. And those are a special kind of scary because they're much more real. And so we have a hard time moving. But if you can remember, one of the big things for dream practices is becoming more fearless. And that's not in a way to say that fear is a bad thing, but to become more comfortable approaching our fears and recognizing them. So if you experience sleep paralysis, the best thing to do is to remember. They often say that the spiritual practice is simply one of remembering. So if we can remember, that takes the edge of that fear off a lot. And secondly, is to just breathe. There's a specific, you can kind of make an F or a shush sound to breathe, to slow down the breath. Just shh. I'm breathing a few times. A third thing you can do is to be more playful. Because we can't move in sleep paralysis, if we have enough awareness of what's happening and we kind of accept the fact that we're immobile, it can be a really fun place to, like, for example, stream a flow of chocolate chip cookies directly into your mouth to enjoy deliciously. You know, if you've seen Harry Potter, when they fight the Boggart and they cast a ridiculous spell, that's like also a really great way of approaching nightmares and sleep paralysis, is to put a humorous spin on it, to bring some levity into it, to not be so serious. So if you don't have full-on sleep paralysis, you might just have bodily sensations. A lot of times in sleep paralysis, the body can feel, starts to feel heavier. You might get like itching or scratching sensations, or like sometimes I feel like a bug is crawling on my skin, and as best as you also can, to just ignore those. It's also your brain trying to test you to see if you're still awake or not. And so by going for that itch or scratching or kind of moving, you're resetting your internal sleep mode. Vivid hypnagogia. We talked about hypnagogia in the last session. Was falling into sleep, can include auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations like you might experience in sleep paralysis that might be more vivid than without. And sleep paralysis also happens in the middle of the night. You're less likely to have sleep paralysis on your first fall asleep. So in the wild method, we're doing this after about 5 hours of sleep. And false awakenings is that dream you have where you think you've woken up and you go to brush your teeth, or sometimes you dream maybe you're starting to write the dream down in your dream journal, only to then wake up again. So you kind of get that like Inception type feeling of the dream within a dream, but there's no dream within a dream within a dream. They're just different dreams, and the dream is changing. And false awakenings I actually take to be a good sign. They can be really frustrating sometimes, but it is a good sign that we are on the right track to waking up. And that's a big capital waking up to the dream, waking up to the illusion of what we think is here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And false awakenings also really parallel, when we think we've become enlightened, to be wary of gurus, or sometimes people take psychedelics or go on an ayahuasca trip, and we feel, or they think that we have this heightened, enlightened sense of self, and that also is very similar to this kind of false awakening, that we think we're really woken up, but we haven't completely. Right? There's always still more layers to unravel. So sleep paralysis, and someone asked about nightmares last week. And this all plays into the shadow, right? And it's a very Jungian term. So the shadow, generally what is unseen, unheard, unloved, unrecognized. And it usually has dark connotations, right? Which we would call a dark shadow. But there's also this golden shadow. So if the dark shadow is all the things that you are ashamed of, afraid of, that you feel maybe regret for. Your golden shadow is everything that is actually wonderful about you, that you've denied yourself in some way, or that other people have denied for you. For instance, it's common for artists to want to pursue their dream, and someone says, no, you can't do that. That's dumb. That's stupid. Like, you're actually not as talented. You'll never be X, Y, or Z. When we hear that enough times, that becomes shadow content. When really we are incredible, right? So there's a lot of gold within us. And you can think of even like the dragon, right? The dragon hoards all this gold. And the shadow we usually think of as the dragon. And in pop culture would have us, slay those dragons. But if we slay a dragon, not only is that a terrible tragedy for a beautiful mythic creature, but we've also lost an opportunity to make a potential powerful friend in that dragon, right? So we can befriend our shadows. They talk a lot about embracing the shadow. And sometimes that's a literal embrace in a dream. You might actually go and hug these shadow entities. We'll talk about approaches to nightmares in a moment also. So how we become aware of shadow content in dreams, in nightmares, by writing down our dreams, right? Dreams will always tell us something that we don't already know. There's always something we don't already know. So by listening to the dreams, we become more attuned and aware of things that we're not picking up consciously while we're awake. The other big way shadow appears is in projection. And a good way to catch a projection, right, when we're projecting on something onto someone, is usually an unreasonably large emotional response to something that, in retrospect, maybe shouldn't have deserved such a strong response. So that also takes some self-awareness and practice to say, wow, I actually really lashed out at this person for, maybe you have such a strong response, someone throwing a trash out the window of their car. Right? For example, that might tell you need to look to yourself to see, wait a minute, are you mad at them because in some ways you feel like you are also not treating the earth as well as you should, or some reason? That's just one example. There's a million we can give. So projections, dreams, and projections can even show up in dream. So if you have people show up in your dream, they may not be actually them, right? It's your image of them. And depending on how the dream is, how you're relating to them, it can also tell you a lot about your own self, which is why we want to be kind and loving to not just ourselves, not just people around us, but the characters and the demons even in our dreams, or whatever they may be. I'm a big advocate of saying, go for them, say hello, make a friend, sit with your demons. And sometimes they're just really hungry. They're angry and they just need a little attention, or they have a message and you've been ignoring them. Right? It's a lot like we've been befriending our friend, but if we're not a good friend, if you have a friend who's not listening to you, ignoring all your boundaries, is being rude or whatever, or you're being rude, like they will get angry at you. And eventually the nightmare becomes so loud, right? It's a dream that is shouting to be heard, is what a nightmare manifests as. So the more we're listening and catching these shadows while we're awake, the less they'll have to scream at us so that they can be heard. So these are 4 general approaches to nightmares. given by Stephen LaBerge and Kristen Lamarca, who are some dream researchers. And I have a list of recommended reading at the end, too, if you'd like. So the first is to avoid. And this isn't bad. None of these are worse or anything like that, really depending on where you're at. Sometimes the best thing to do for any given person at any given time might be to avoid. Like, it's okay. Sometimes our traumas can be really overwhelming, and we don't have the mental capacity to confront or integrate or anything. And so it's okay to, in a dream, either change the dream or even just to wake up altogether. That's the first step, right? So even instead of getting stuck in the nightmare, we can just end what is happening there. The second is confront. So this is usually maybe takes a more antagonistic, right? Confront or conquering the dream. So this is like the slaying of the dragon, so to speak. And I don't recommend dream violence. Sometimes it happens non-lucidly. And I would also say be compassionate with yourself when that happens. There are times where things in our subconscious mind feel like are out to get us, right? Like bad habits, for example. We can approach those, we can end them. Something that's trying to kill us in a dream, it's okay to confront in some ways. And I'm not necessarily saying to go kill your demons in the dream. Sometimes confrontation isn't so violent, but a sense of conquering or overpowering. The third is flow, right? To go with the flow. And that is to simply be a witness to the nightmare. And these dreams are interesting. You can wake up sometimes feeling like you just watched a horror movie without being too caught up in it. And actually, that's one of my favorite practices, is to watch a scary movie or a dramatic movie. Notice when your body starts to tense up, and relax it, and remind yourself that this is a dream. This isn't real. The movie isn't real, right? They're also projections in another sense of the word. And so to simply witness that, to go with the flow, the Buddhists sometimes say, like, if an alligator is eating you, to just let the alligator eat you. To just let it happen. Allow anything that's happening to happen, to bear witness to it. And this takes a little more skill, which is why things like meditation come in handy. And even in meditation, the same practice of stillness, as small as like your leg falling asleep, is a little microcosm of this discomfort, of something unpleasant. And our first reaction, right, to avoid our leg falling asleep is to avoid it, to just like move our leg, shake it out, or confront it, and just let it happen. Is a small microcosm of that. It's a great practice. The fourth, though, is to integrate. The fourth is embracing the shadow, giving the shadow a hug, asking if you're aware enough in a dream what this nightmare wants, what it has to teach you, who this character figure is, and to recognize that as a part of your own self. And so you just integrate. And they're not always demons. Fun fact about me, I got sent to anger management in like grade school. Believe it or not. And now I'm as cool as a cucumber. But that aggression is shadow work for me. Like as a child, I have this inner child who likes to throw a lot of tantrums. And I did have a dream where there was this angry, tantruming child on the street. And this wasn't lucid. Was it lucid? It's hard to remember. It was a few years ago. Regardless, I went up to the kid and said, hey, like, it's okay. And just kind of integrated my elevated adult consciousness to say, it's okay. You're going to be okay. You don't need to throw a tantrum. And, waking up from something that sounds so simple, like, feels so incredible. To see a shadow figure's face change sometimes. If someone's, if you've had a dream of someone like stalking you, you say, well, who are you? And maybe their face in the dream turns from an angry one to like a smiling one. The potential for transformation in dreams is astronomical. And the feelings of joy and accomplishment can be just as profound when we're in them. So you've had a nightmare, and when you have the thought, I have to wake up. This is a nightmare. I want to wake up. That's being pre-lucid. You have just enough awareness to recognize you're in a dream, but not enough awareness to really question or acknowledge the dream state for what it is. Semi-lucid happens in dreams where we're maybe questioning now the dream. You say, wait a minute. Is this a dream? And you might catch yourself performing a reality check in the dream. And I have had many a dream where I do a reality check and it doesn't work. You try to like switch the lights or something. Or I've looked at my phone in dreams to check the clock. And your brain has a fantastic ability to keep you believing the dream. Dream characters will even try to convince you that you're not actually still dreaming. So you're semi-lucid. You have an inkling, but you just kind of miss it. And then we have fully lucid. And that's when you say, aha, this is a dream. And at this point, you can have some autonomy in the dream. You can choose to go fly, open a door and imagine something behind it. Ask the dream a question. Sometimes you can just shout a question out into the dream. And you may receive all kinds of different responses. And sustaining this lucidity also takes some practice. Again, through meditation. For me, sometimes I need to keep my hand, my dream hand, in the field of vision that I'm in. And that's enough to keep me there. Some people recommend looking around the dream or spinning slowly or rapidly if you want to change the dream. And super lucid is acknowledging the dream for its full extent. And this is when you start getting into deeper stages of dream yoga. For example, a small difference between fully lucid and super lucid is the way you might travel in dreams. If you're fully lucid, you might try to run and then fly in your dream, as if there was still somewhere, something you're traveling through. And if you're ever super lucid, you can just say, wait a minute. Boom, scene change, like immediately. There's no need to travel. Again, a lot like Neo, just kind of waking up after a minute. And at the end of the movie, he just takes off flying instead of like having to run across the building, the rooftops, and he doesn't quite make it. Like no one ever makes it on the first jump. So these are some stages of lucidity. And then we have the stages of dream yoga. And there are more. Andrew Holacek breaks these down into about 7 or 8, but there's 4 major ones. And the first we've practiced already in becoming lucid, right? Just the recognition of the dream, to say this is a dream. And by the way, everything I'm saying here also parallels the death and the dying. To say, oh, I'm aware that I am dying. I'm aware that this is death. The second is transformation in a dream, to change one object into a different object, right? You have an apple, you turn it into an orange. And then at long last, you can compare apples to oranges in the dream state. And multiplication is exactly what it sounds like. You have an apple and you try to turn it into 4 or 5 apples. Or there's a building and you try to create another building. However small or large you'd like to do this. And the same with transformation, right? You can make objects smaller or larger. You can also practice this in certain visualization exercises. Sometimes just imagining a shape, imagining that shape get larger, imagining that shape get smaller. If we have time at the end, I will do some meditation or a yoga nidra and some questions after we get through some stuff. So that'll be exciting.
We've been on together 32 minutes so far, just for your tracking.
Yeah. I'm also keeping the time. All right. And final is unification, right? This is this grand oneness that we speak of in yoga, right? Yoga means to bind, union, to yoke, to bring things together. And even the lucidity requires a sense of ego. We require a sense of self to say, I am aware that I'm dreaming. And this unification is the dissolving of the I, right? This ego death that we experience into the grand oneness of all that is, which is this difference between the absolute and relative, which we'll talk about in a moment. Actually, let's talk about those right now. Where is this, right? So the absolute and the relative, right? The absolute is the big picture of our place in the universe, right? Like saying all is one. It's easy to say all is one, sure, okay. But then we have the relative, right? Our day-to-day lives. Yes, all is one, and there's no good, there's no evil, everything just is as it is, and everything is perfect, sure. But I am here in my body right now facing my daily life tasks. And dream yoga in particular is very susceptible to spiritual bypassing. And the spiritual bypassing is the quote unquote good vibes only type of thing, where we don't allow for any struggle or quote unquote negativity or darkness. So there's a good balance to hold between these two, and they can simultaneously coexist, right? We can recognize that we have our physical body, and we can also recognize that our physical body is a manifestation of billions of years of evolution as a representation of the universe experiencing its own self, all that jazz.
There's a question on the chat about what role does sleep paralysis play in dreams and furthermore in lucid dreams?
Yeah, so the sleep paralysis is an in-between state. Sleep paralysis happens when we're waking up from a dream but haven't fully woken up. So our bodies are still asleep and our mind is more awake. So when we're in that dream state and our bodies are paralyzed, but we can actually open our eyes. And because we're still in that kind of dream state, and because we're paralyzed, breathing is more difficult. There tends to be a sense of panic. And so that's why it tends to be a scary experience. And it doesn't always have to be. We can transform it. That takes a little more time, practice, and skill. And not everyone experiences sleep paralysis that much. Some people are much more prone to sleep paralysis than others. I know people who've never had sleep paralysis at all. Personally, I'm a very light sleeper, so I tend to wake up really quickly. And so I've only had sleep paralysis, honestly, maybe like a handful or less of times, just because my body wakes up really quickly. Someone who's a more heavier sleeper might experience something like sleep paralysis a little bit more often. And also, there's a lot to say on how stressed you are, your day-to-day activities. There's not a whole lot of actual certain knowledge on what exactly makes someone more prone to sleep paralysis. So I hope that answers your question. So, the foundational practices of dream yoga, which are, in essence, the foundational practices to prepare for death and dying. All of dream yoga has the end goal of preparing for that final moment. The first is changing the karmic traces. So, karma is often misunderstood in culture, right? People talk about karma like what goes around comes around. And there's this beautiful quote by Sogyal Rinpoche. He says, karma is not fatalistic or predetermined. Karma means our ability to create and to change. It is because we can determine how and why we act. We can change. Right? Karma in another word is yoga. You might have heard of karma yoga, which is the yoga of action. So karma isn't necessarily what goes around comes around, but that what we practice, we get better at. And what we practice and get better at becomes habitual. And that's what karma is. So if you practice getting angry at things, you believe it or not, there is a choice to react to that anger, out of anger or something. That's a practice, and that, boom, cements in our brain over time. So to change the karmic traces, is to catch yourself in those moments and say, wait a minute, I don't have to do this. And to even begin reminding yourself that, wait a minute, this is a dream. This is dreamlike. We're sort of dismantling the rigid constructs we have of the world around us. Right? We're developing a mental flexibility here. And there is so much to say about this, but I only have 20 minutes left, so I'm going to move through. The second is removing grasping and aversion. Right? So grasping, or what we might also call desire in Buddhism, right? We've all heard desire causes suffering. This grasping, this endless wanting. And that doesn't mean that we don't have things that we enjoy. It's more of the psychological grasping that we have. This inability to let go of things. And aversion is the running away from, right? Aversion is that spiritual bypassing that says good vibes only. I'm not going to think about that thing that scares me or that causes me any anxiety or anything. I'd rather just ignore it. So that is also no bueno. Strengthen the intention. So intention is a huge point. In Yoga Nidra especially, right? We start the practice with setting an intention and reinforcing that intention and questioning that intention. You know, what is your motivation for whatever it is you're doing? What do you hope to gain? How do you intend to benefit? Is you more to benefit yourself? Is more to benefit others? Cultivating memory, especially in the dream work. We need to remember our dreams and become aware of them, as well as that prospective memory. Right? We talked about last session of remembering to do something in the future. And joyful effort. Back to this playfulness. We should be having a degree of fun here. To not take things so seriously. And that's not to say we make fun of things necessarily. I think there's a difference between seriousness and sincerity. We don't want to take ourselves too serious, but we do want to be sincere in our approach. And finally, consistency. Just like anything else, right? Practice makes perfect. I often use this metaphor of walking on an open field. If you walk through grass, you'll stamp down the grass and it leaves a little bit of an imprint, right? And that's like playing piano for a day. You took your piano lesson, but if you don't practice again, that grass is just goes right back to where it was. But if you walk that path every day, eventually that grass starts to flatten out completely and becomes a dirt road. And that's when that habit becomes a little bit stronger. Eventually, over time, that dirt road becomes a brick road, maybe. And over time, the brick road turns into a cement road. And at each step, the practice becomes more durable, more enduring, right? And harder then to undo, which is why we don't want to practice bad habits. And that's not to say that cement can't be undone. It just takes a lot more effort. And things do that, right? Meditation practices can do that. People take ayahuasca and psychedelics for this exact thing. Going to cognitive behavioral therapies. All these kinds of practices are meant to disrupt the very concrete habits, thoughts, and beliefs that we hold. All right, we talked about these. So, Maya is illusion, right? From the root word to make, which, going back to Morpheus, the god of dreams, to morph, to form. Right? So dreams, illusion, to form, to make, is the power in the process of creation. Right? So when we say that life is a dream or that life is illusory, we're not saying that it's not real, right? It's not unreal. It's being continuously created. And we have a role in its creation. Just as we have always the ability to choose for our lives our own immediate actions for the most part, right? We can decide when to wake up. We can more or less decide what we want to eat for breakfast, for dinner, how to move our bodies if we want to go for a run or to stay on the couch. And I'm not saying those choices are always easy or difficult. They can be all kinds of things. But we're also co-creating, right? So waking life, I consider to be a shared dreaming experience. We are all here co-creating the world that we live in. And we all have a little bit to say in our little corners, our own personal individual corners and communities start to ripple out. And that's how change happens on a larger level, is realizing that things aren't as stable as we think they are. Back to this mental flexibility, that we have the ability to change things, and things don't have to be the way that they are for ourselves or for others. So, dying a good death without regret, without fear, and without joy. This is fairly common, right? You hear a lot of people talk, wish they lived more without regret. And it's harder to die with joy, maybe, but that comes from living a good life. And we remove the fear by doing all of that shadow work that we've done. We've become aware of our habits. We've made friends with our demons, with our anxieties, and we've lived in honest, wholesome ways that we don't regret. So there's a couple of practices for dying a good death, right? One is the practice of generosity. because you can't take anything with you when you die. And practicing generosity is a practice of giving things away. And Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who wrote the Tibetan Yogas of Sleep and Dream, it writes about a practice or where you take one apple, and if you have a hard time giving, to just give that one apple to the other hand, and then back to the other hand. So simple. And eventually you give that apple away. Right? So this practice of giving things away, letting things go. And spiritual armor, right? There's moral codes and precepts. Right? We all have a certain set of beliefs. Everyone has different moral codes. Some people take on a precept of, I don't ever do X, Y, or Z. And these things also act as a spiritual armor to protect us. Tonglen is taking and sending. Tonglen is a meditation where, right, we take the negativity in the form of smoke and exhale it after being purified with our loving kindness breath. I recommend, even just on YouTube, finding a Tonglen meditation. So meditation and mindfulness help us stabilize the mind. Right? So when a disruptive thought arises, the meditation practices keep us from destabilizing our normal patterns. The meditation practices allow us to say, hold on, I don't need to react to this. I can be aware of it, right? Don't feed the negativity. We're not putting gasoline on any fires here, which is what a lot of our habits tend to do when we are angry, anxious, jealous, etc. Right? And back to this spiritual bypassing, right? We need to feel it to heal it. And the same with grief. We need to give time to grieve. If we keep putting on grief, we keep putting off grief, it'll just accumulate, this large mountain. And so I talk about like wringing the towel, right? Our hearts are towels. And when we are grieving, it's like taking the mop. And we need to wring it out. We need to dry it out. Otherwise, if a towel becomes so saturated, that's not going to be good for much. It's heavy. The towel isn't as useful. So having a good cry, making times to cry, making times to honor the dead in all kinds of ways helps wring out that towel, allowing us to heal. Briefly, I want to talk about the Toltec traditions of dying. Mictlan is the underworld, the land of the dead, which is the place that we go into dreams, right? So in this tradition, the underworld is the realm of dreams, is the realm of the dead. There's not much difference. It's the first place we visit to. And there's an Aztec saying where they say that the one who does not remember dreams is said to be living dead, for they cannot change their waking life. So in the Toltec tradition, they believe that in order to change our waking life, we need to first change our dreams and not the other way around. Things start inside, then go outside. And the last is alebrijes. In the Toltec tradition that I want to talk about, I just think they're so fun and beautiful. I have a Mexican background, and I saw Coco with my family. Such a beautiful movie. And alebrijes are these spirit guides. They're usually blends of 2 or 3 different animals. And they're brightly colored. They're, usually comes in like little figurines or something. Alebrijes guide us. They are similar to like familiars, or even they can take on the role of angels in a sense. And Alebrijes, I just want to mention, are really fun if you want to explore finding or meeting an Alebrije in the dream state. Can be a really great, fun practice and experience. And the role of Yoga Nidra. Yoga Nidra is a sister practice of the dream work. Right? It translates to draw from the void. It's a practice of conscious rest. A few of you might have heard of Yoga Nidra already. Some people call it the yogi sleep. I've mentioned it briefly. But in yoga, there are the koshas, and these koshas are the different layers of our body. And Yoga Nidra is a systemic process of getting deeper and deeper into these different layers. Annamaya kosha is the food body, is our physical body, right? The kind that needs to eat, needs nourishment. Pranamaya kosha is the energy body. Some of you might have also heard of pranayama exercises, right? Prana is the energy force that we have, or chi in some traditions. And so pranayama is directing the energy with the use of our breath and breathing exercises. Manomaya kosha is the mental body. Vijnana maya kosha, our wisdom body. And Anandamaya kosha, the bliss body. The bliss body is what they would call the clear light. Right? This is like that absolute. This is what they may call the rainbow body. Right? Knowing that you are the same light as everything else. And in Catholic Christian traditions, right, this could even be synonymous with the Holy Spirit that we all have. It's synonymous with this enlightenment, nirvana, this bliss body. In Buddhism, they talk about the imagery of the sun behind the clouds, right? This is that sun, the bliss body. No matter what the weather is, if it's stormy, if there's monsoons, if there's a drought, there's always that sun behind everything. This clear light is absolute. So, where to find me? I'm mostly on Instagram, like we mentioned, Inner Sense Healing Arts Collective. And not all of these are weekly. I messed this up. But Dream Yoga, Yoga Nidra is tonight. So, and this is a 30-minute practice, Yoga Nidra. And Dream Yoga is 1 hour. And I take you straight to sleep. So you can practice from your bed, Dream Yoga on Wednesday nights. And Yoga Nidra, we do a 30-minute practice. So if you'd like to practice with me tonight, you can go register via the Inner Sense Healing Arts Collective website or Instagram page. And then I host dream circles first Thursdays of every month from 7 to 9. And death cafes are here in Chicago. We'll be doing those in person. We have been doing them online, but we're shifting them to Chicago. So I know not everyone's here in Chicago. We may still do some online, but stay tuned for that. So if you are in Chicago, this Saturday, we'll be meeting around Palmer Square. And if not, you can stay tuned for when we find an online one. And lastly, some recommended reading. I don't know if they'll share these slides or things. This is where a lot of information I've gotten from. I'm not going to read them all off, but they're here. And page 2. Yeah, these are awesome books. I recommend them all. You don't have to read them all, but give them a look, see what strikes out for you. And, I hope you continue your exploration in dream work.
Excellent. We have 5 minutes left. I know we have a couple of slides that only take us about a minute and a half. Was there a 2-minute thing you wanted to do, Alejandro, or no?
I'm happy
We
to
can
take
take
questions. If there's any more questions, it's kind of a short time to do a meditation, but if anyone has any other questions, or not, maybe. Don't be shy. I love taking questions. And also, my album is on Spotify.
Nice.
Um, if you want to check it out there, it's an hour and a half, so that's also meant to like work for your sleep cycles. I leave it playing on overnight, or just during my yoga practice, or during whatever kind of chill time you'd like.
Okay. So in terms of when, so I was sharing before got on the call, I had a friend whose mother recently died. Um, and what kind of things do you think somebody um, who is with a loved one and they're in their last days, how would you use dreams in that instance?
To ask them about what kind of dreams that they might be having.
Mm.
It's really common for people who are dying to have visitations from their ancestors or loved ones, and really reassuring people that it's okay to go and being honest with them. It's often not helpful to say everything's going to be okay, you'll make it through, because a lot of people who are dying know that they're dying. And so that's also not helpful. So just being open, accepting, loving, as simple as it sounds, asking them about what they're experiencing, if they're able to talk, even, even just like touch. Sometimes just a hand to hold is really nice. It's a lot of it is holding space. Like it's which it can sound easier than it actually is for some people. Um, in the Tibetan tradition, when people are dying, or even after they've dead, they'll read to them the instructions from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because hearing is the last sense to go
Oh,
when we die. And even in dreams, we still hear, right? We never really turn off our ears until we die. So even just talking to them, being reaffirming, reassuring, and comforting, telling them stories, or if someone's in a different tradition, saying prayers or rosaries or things like that, can be really nice and comforting.
wonderful. Thank you for taking the question.
Of
Um,
course.
Lori, can we flash the slides? And I know we have a poll also. So we are celebrating Juneteenth, Be Strong Families. We added this to our paid holidays for our organization. I encourage you to look at our recordings of webinars on the website if you will miss us tomorrow. And we'll be back again on Monday with environmental vitality, looking at more broadly the domains of vitality. And then next Friday, together, we'll have a Grief Compass Cafe, which is using our new Grief Compass deck questions. And it's a chance to really go deeper into our own thoughts and experiences and senses about grief and navigating trauma and loss, which we've talked about is sometimes uncomfortable or uncommon for us to be sharing about. So we'd love to have you join. So if you can complete the poll before you head off to the rest of your day, I want to thank everyone for being here and Alejandro for sharing his expertise and his knowledge that he's gained walking the line between science and spirituality as he shared with us on Tuesday.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Sweet
Great to
dreams.
see and be with you all.